Part 6. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruan Meng Baobao. Chapter 51. Shopkeeper Zhang took 10 boxes of skin beautifying cream from Suwan, closed the shop door, and went to the largest Qian pavilion in the town. According to Suwan's instructions, he gave it to them for free. If they liked it, he would visit them next time. His Yanzi pavilion. Suwan was testing shopkeeper Zhang to see if he was capable of the job. Therefore, after giving him 10 boxes of ruby ointment, she stopped interfering and started preparing the medicinal materials and refining the wound medicine. Dr. Zhou had the foresight to hire 2 medicine boys to help Suwan prepare the medicinal materials. Suwan first took care of the medicine for her wounds, and would only come forward to diagnose and treat patients with difficult and complicated diseases. She would take time to go to Ziwixiang Tower for lunch and dinner. The days were full and busy. Suwan didn't know that she rarely showed up for medical consultations, and only took care of the patients that Dr. Zhou couldn't cure. The rumors in the town added a mysterious color to her, spreading her medical skills to almost everyone. No. Zhang and Song Dalan picked up the letter from the capital at the inn. Mother and son found a corner, took out the letter and read it. Song Dalan took out a 20-tael silver note, his face showed joy, and he quickly handed it to Zhang and continued to read the letter. The further he looked down, the more solemn Song Dalan's face became. After reading them all, he frowned and said nothing. "What's wrong? What did Shuer say in the letter?" Zhang observed Song Dalan's face, and her joy at getting the money was instantly halved. She slapped Song Dalan on the shoulder. "You damn kid, are you trying to kill me?" Song Dalan glanced around and saw no one, then leaned into Jiang's ear and said, "My cousin asked us to do something to Suwan so that she can't leave Xinghua village. After that, find an official position for me." "Let you be an official," Mrs. Zhang became excited. "If Song Dalan becomes an official, then she will be the old lady of the official. Not to mention breaking Suwan's legs so that she could not leave Xinghua village. Zhang could do it even if she killed Suwan. Let's go back quickly and add up the total." Song Dalan took Jiang's hand and a light flashed in his eyes. "Mom, my cousin's stepfather was poisoned, and the prince posted a list to find a miracle doctor. Didn't a miracle doctor appear in our town not long ago? It's at Xinglan Medical Center. He can't be cured by other doctors. The disease was cured in his hands. Shall we write to my cousin about this?" Zhang rolled his eyes, pinched the 20-tael banknote in his sleeve, and urged, "Hurry up and write a letter. If the miracle doctor is really capable of curing the disease, Su Mingxiu will reward them." Song Dalan went to the bookstore and asked for pen, ink, paper and inkstone to write a letter and send it to the capital. Suwan didn't know what Jiang's mother and son were doing. She was working at the Ziwixiang restaurant for an hour and a half. She was so tired that she was sweating profusely. She dragged her tired body out of the restaurant and took a look at the fragrance restaurant opposite. Her business dropped sharply. 2/3. Shopkeeper Fang stood at the door and saw Suwan leaving Ziwixiang building, and was about to go up to block her, negotiate terms, and lure people to Fengxiang building. A horse galloped over and suddenly stopped beside Suwan. "You." The maroon horse raised its hooves and neighed, puffing air from its nostrils. Suwan stepped aside and looked up to see Zhao Wei sitting astride the horse. His eyes were dark and his jawline was cold and hard. He was dressed in black clothes, which made him look heroic. "Mr. Zhao." Suwan raised the corner of her mouth and said hello. Zhao Wei turned over and dismounted, and said in a low voice, "Miss Su, are you free now? Is something wrong?" "Yes." Zhao Wei's deep eyes fell on her fair face and asked, "Can you ride a horse?" "Yes." Before Suwan could finish her words, she was thrown onto the horse by Zhao Wei. She was so frightened that she tightened her grip on the reins. "Zhao Wei, what are you doing?" Zhao Wei curled his lips and slapped the horse's butt. The horse turned around and galloped away. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruan Meng Baobao. Chapter 52. Zhao De followed, but before the horse could stop, he turned over and gave the horse to Zhao Wei knowingly. Zhao Wei rode a horse to chase Suwan. Zhao De took a breath and was about to buy a horse. When he turned around, he saw Gu Huizi, wearing a moon-white gown, standing in the crowd not far away like an orchid tree. A pair of dark eyes were as cold as the cold pool of the abyss, looking forward with bright eyes. Suwan is on horseback, her clothes are flying in the breeze, her grace is natural, smart, and free and easy. She suddenly turned her head to look at Zhao Wei, who was catching up, raised an eyebrow, raised her whip, and the horse galloped away like an arrow from its string. Zhao Wei looked at her provocative look and twitched his brows. The horse under her crotch belongs to him. As long as he whistles, it will stay in place. It will be easy for him to win her. But he had something to ask her not to offend, so he pinched the horse's belly with his slender legs, and the horse flew out with a whoosh. Gu Huizi looked at the two people who were carefree and unrestrained. It was as if no one could interfere with the harmonious atmosphere of chasing after each other. His thin lips pursed into a thin line, his eyes were so dark that no light could enter, and no emotion could be seen. Zhao De scratched his beard and strode towards Gu Huizi. He patted Gu Huizi with his palm as big as a cattail leaf fan and said, "Brother Gu, there are wounded in the military camp. The general is lending his wife to you. Don't take it personally, go." Gu Huizi frowned, looked at the hand on his shoulder, raised his hand and slapped it away. Zhao Wei has no incompetent people, so he is reduced to robbing people on the street. Gu Huizi glanced at Zhao De indifferently, and curled his lips. Famous is not as good as meeting. The famous Hussar general is nothing more than that. Hey, why are you talking so much that you are trying to suppress someone? Zhao Da's eyes widened in anger. Gu Huizi dusted his shoulders and disappeared into the crowd. Suwan hadn't ridden a horse for a long time. Her grandfather raised her to be both civilized and martial, and she didn't fall behind in anything. She likes horseback riding. When she is busy with studies and work, running a few laps at the racecourse can relieve her stress. Suwan looked at the military camp in front of her, her red lips curled up, her eyes became sharp, and she sprinted faster, stopping 1 mile away from the military camp. She turned her head and showed a victorious smile towards Zhao Wei. The strong wind ruffled her hair, and her smile was as bright as a flower. The blazing sunshine behind her was not as bright as her smile, and the light seemed to dim accordingly. Zhao Wei's eyes deepened, he pulled the reins and kept pace with Suwan. He turned his head to look at her, his eyes falling on her beautiful face. "You are very good at equestrian skills. Have you learned it before?" Suwan brushed her messy hair behind her ears and said vaguely, "I learned it in private." She was particularly happy in the match with Zhao Wei, and she hadn't been so hardy in a long time. She reached out and touched the horse's mane, revealing 2 shallow dimples on her cheeks. "For the sake of your racing with me, I will forgive your offense this time." Zhao Wei was indeed abrupt, and said in a low and hoarse voice, "The matter is urgent. I hope Miss Su will take care of it. I am Mrs. Gu." Although Suwan thought that she would fall out with Gu Hui, but now that she has the identity of his wife on her head, she had to express her attitude. "It is not appropriate for you to call me Miss Su." Zhao Wei was startled, then Kong Shen Rulio said, "Mrs. Gu, please come with me." He dismounted and threw the reins to the soldier. Suwan dismounted and gave the reins to the soldiers beside him. The two of them walked all the way to the camp. The soldiers called all the way, "General." Zhao Wei opened the tent and made a gesture of invitation. Suwan bent slightly and went in, and smelled a strong smell of blood. She saw a big man lying on the bed, with an arrow stuck in his heart, his face pale, and he fell into a coma. The military doctor was stunned when he saw Suwan, then looked past her to Zhao Wei, and said anxiously, "General, the Deputy General is about to die, what should we do?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruan Meng Baobao. Chapter 53. Zhao Wei put down the curtain, looked at the lieutenant on the bed, and asked Suwan beside him, "Can you cure it?" We have to look at the specific situation. Suwan hadn't checked yet, but didn't dare to make a conclusion. Go and have a look. Zhao Wei walked to the bed and opened the blood basin. Suwan walked over and saw clearly that the blood in his chest had not stopped at all, and quickly took the Deputy General's pulse. His hands were cold, his heartbeat and breathing were rapid, typical of shock caused by excessive blood loss. "Rope," Suwan shouted urgently. Zhao Wei got the rope and gave it to Suwan. Suwan used a rope as a tourniquet to stop the Deputy General's bleeding. Dr. Lu was stunned, staring at Suwan's slightly childish face, wondering, is the general stupid? Inviting such a young girl here, is it because the Deputy General didn't die quickly enough and he wanted to send the Deputy General to heaven as soon as possible? General, didn't you say you were going to ask for the miracle doctor? Dr. Lu pinched his palms with his fingers, resisting the urge to drag Suwan away, and asked, "Is this girl a disciple of the miracle doctor? The Deputy General is in critical condition. You can't be careless, this." "She is a miracle doctor," Zhao Wei interrupted the military doctor. Military Doctor Lu stared straight in the eyes, too shocked to speak. She is a miracle doctor?" Dr. Lu looked at Zhao Wei and then at Suwan, thinking that the general was deceived by beauty. He said sincerely, "General, even if this girl is extremely talented, she can't possibly cure the Lieutenant General's condition. This arrow hurts the vital part. Even if the envoy from the Taiyuan hospital comes, there is not much certainty. You still have to ask this girl's master." He didn't wait for Zhao Wei to speak, and seriously advised Suwan, "Girl, the lieutenant has experienced hundreds of battles and made countless contributions. He is a hero of the Great Zhou Kingdom. You can't act recklessly and don't show off on him. If you can't cure it, it's because your medical skills are not good." Suwan looked at Zhao Wei and asked, "To treat it, or not to cure it?" "Zhao Wei, you treat it?" Suwan wrote down the prescription and handed it to another Qin military doctor. "Go grab the medicine and boil it, pour it into a copper basin with boiling water and bring it over." She saw a medicine box next to her, and when she opened it, she found a variety of copper and iron scalpels inside, which were shaped like the surgical instruments of the Ming dynasty and Han dynasty she had seen in the museum. In addition, there were silver thread, mulberry white leather thread and curved needles for suturing. Suwan took out the curved needle, mulberry white suture and scalpel and handed them to Dr. Qin, cooked them in boiling water. Dr. Lu stood anxiously aside, watching Dr. Qin leave in a hurry, and was ready to persuade him. Suwan slapped another prescription into his hand, "Grind these herbs into fine powder." Dr. Lu looked at the prescription with a sullen face. "What is this?" "Ma Fei-san." Dr. Liu's eyes widened. This is the legendary Ma Fei powder? Nowadays, they use a special kind of wine to make people drunk and relieve pain." He looked at Suwan uncertainly. She broke the arrow. Miraculously, their unstoppable bleeding actually stopped. "If you stay still, he will really die," Suwan said coldly. "No matter what, he will die. Just take a gamble and he will still have a chance to survive." Dr. Lu squeezed the prescription with her fingers. She knew the formula of Ma Fei powder and it stopped the bleeding, which meant she had 2 brushes. Maybe she can be cured? He gritted his teeth and strode away to prepare Ma Fei powder. A quarter of an hour later, the 2 military doctors had everything ready. Suwan took out the scalpel, roasted it with fire, and then disinfected it with cork liquid. He mixed Mafe powder with hot wine and fed it to the Deputy General to drink. Then he cut open the skin on the chest and took out the arrowhead. He found that the heart was not injured. She couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Drlu opened his eyes wide. She scratched the skin, and the amount of bleeding was so small. When he takes out arrows, he usually bleeds a lot, and the wound easily suppurates, causing the injured to have a high fever and die. Suwon wouldn't put people to death, right? The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruan Meng Baobao. Chapter 54. Suwon took a boiled bandage and pressed it to stop the bleeding, rinsed the wound with cork liquid and disinfected it, then sutured it, applied the wound ointment she developed, and bandaged the wound. Suwon stared at the Deputy General's pale face and wiped the cold sweat on his head with his shoulder. Patients in shock generally need to replenish normal saline and glucose, but in this era there are no such things to rehydrate patients. She hesitated for a moment, then asked Dr. Chin to get distilled water, warm water, salt, and sucrose, then took out 2 vasoactive pills from her sleeves and stuffed them into the Deputy General's mouth. Dr. Lu quickly shouted, "What did you give him to eat?" Suwon had no time to pay attention to him, so she covered the Deputy General with a quilt to keep him warm, and told the soldier, "Go and prepare a stove and a thick quilt." Yes, Dr. Chin immediately went to do it. Dr. Liu's face turned red, humiliation and shame mixed together. Zhao Wei saw Suwon packing her things and asked in a low voice, "Can it be cured?" "It depends on his fate." Suwon packed up her things, glanced at the Deputy General and said, "He is currently in a state of suspended animation. If he can get better, he will survive." Zhao Wei nodded slightly. Dr. Chin brought the things over, and Suwon mixed distilled water with a certain proportion of salt to replace the saline solution, and then mixed warm water with sucrose instead of glucose and gave it to the Deputy General to drink. "Now that the situation is critical, something is better than nothing, so we can only make do with it." The soldiers brought quilts and stoves. Suwon covered the Deputy General, then sat by the bed and took his pulse. Surprise flashed in her eyes, and her pulse did not become weak or intangible, but gradually strengthened. Zhao Wei noticed something strange about her and quickly asked, "How is it?" "His condition is starting to improve." A smile appeared on Suwon's face, eyes shining. "If his hands and feet are warm, his lips become red when pressed with fingers, and the skin is dry, not clammy, then he will survive this disaster." Zhao Wei looked at the relaxed smile on Suwon's face and was sure that she felt confident, and he felt a little relieved. But military Dr. Lu didn't believe it. He was obviously in critical condition. How could he just drink a bowl of salt water or a bowl of sugar water and be cured? He went to check his pulse and his eyes widened in shock. This is impossible. The pulse actually returned to normal. Dr. Lu did as Suwon said and pressed the Deputy General's lips. The pale lips regained their color. He touched his skin again and it began to gradually warm. "Is this good?" Upon seeing this, Chin's military doctor also checked and said with great joy, "Okay. The Deputy General is cured," he said to Suwon with an excited expression. "General, you really didn't lie to us. Your medical skills are as superb as Hua Hua's Tuo is still alive, but I don't know who your master is." "My master has passed away." Suwon thought of her grandfather and felt a little depressed. Dr. Chin noticed that Suwon was not in a good mood, and realized that he had offended him. He wisely did not ask any more questions, but asked Suwon for advice on how to treat this type of patient. Suwon took the Deputy General as an example and told him in detail how to treat him. Dr. Lu came to his senses, raised his ears and eavesdropped. After listening, he suddenly realized that sugar water and salt water were so effective. Unknowingly, Dr. Lu was very convinced of Suwon. He asked, "What do we do next?" Suwon wrote a prescription for him. "When he urinates, boil this medicine for him to drink. Dr. Lu changed his previous attitude and regarded this prescription as a treasure, studying it over and over again. Suwan observed the situation of the deputy general and saw that it was getting late, so he said goodbye to Zhao Wei. "I'll take you back." Zhao Wei refused to let Suwan refuse and walked out of the tent first. Suwan left with Zhao Wei. Dr. Lu looked at the hanging curtain and suddenly slapped his forehead. "I forgot to ask her name." Dr. Qin thought of something. This girl should be the miracle doctor who has been in the spotlight recently in Zitown. Marquis Dingyuan has been poisoned. Maybe she can treat him. Dr. Lu felt ashamed because he had underestimated Suwan before. In order to make up for his mistake, he wrote a letter to the prince recommending Suwan. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruan Meng Baobao. Chapter 55. On the way back, the two men rode horses at a leisurely pace. The breeze blew on Suwan's face, and the fatigue all over her body dissipated, making her feel a little more comfortable. She narrowed her eyes slightly, enjoying this moment of tranquility. Zhao Wei looked at her lazily swinging the riding crop, with a faint look of tiredness on her face. He couldn't help but think that when she was in the Marquis mansion, she didn't need to run around for a living, she only had to attend banquets in various mansions and live a carefree life. Despite the huge turning points and gaps in her life, she was not negative. Instead, she adapted to this kind of life and became more vivid and radiant. "How is the progress of the wound medicine?" Zhao Wei broke the silence. "I can deliver it to you in half a month." Suwan yawned sleepily and looked at the nearby medical center, feeling a little more energetic. "Do you know the news about Marquis Dingyuan being poisoned?" Zhao Wei pulled the reins and dismounted with Suwan. "I know. It can't be cured." Suwan showed impatience and glanced at him. "Don't mention him in front of me from now on." Zhao Wei laughed, took out the silver from his sleeve, and threw it to Suwan. "Diagnosis fee." Suwan raised his hand to catch it, put it in his sleeve pocket, took out a bottle of wound medicine and threw it to Zhao Wei, and warned, "Let the military doctor change the dressing for the deputy general. Keep an eye on his condition within 12 hours. Be careful. If he has a fever and the wound becomes suppurative, tell me immediately." "Okay." Zhao Wei stood still. "Wan, we are guests. Why don't you invite General Zhao in for a cup of tea?" Gu Huizi calmly came out of the medical clinic and stood next to Suwan. He looked at her with warm eyes and suddenly raised his hand to her wind-blown hair was gently brushed behind her ears. "Mom said you didn't have lunch, are you hungry?" Suwan was stunned. The white sunlight shone on his clear face, showing a different kind of tenderness. His cool fingertips touched her forehead, and her skin felt faintly hot. She gritted her teeth secretly. This bitch started to get sick again. "You want to act, right? I'm hungry. Do you want to cook noodles for me?" Suwan raised her eyebrows and smiled, making things difficult for him. "I really want to eat the Yangchun noodles you made." Gu Huizi was surprised, but he took the move. "Mr. Zhou just made chicken soup, I'll cook noodles for you." He turned his head and looked at Zhao Wei, his eyes full of helplessness, and said, "General Zhao, we'll see you another day. Treat you." "Zhao Wei." He looked sideways at Suwan, just in time to see her roll her eyes upwards, with a smile in her eyes. "You are busy, I have something to do." Zhao Wei rode away. Suwan snorted at Gu Huizi, not taking what he said seriously at all, and went to sleep in her room in the backyard. Gu Huizi looked at her back, the smile on his lips disappeared, and he turned his eyes to the backyard. Suwan lay on the bed, tossing and turning for half an hour, unable to fall asleep. She simply got up and prepared to refine the medicine for the wound. With a squeak sound, the door was opened. She suddenly saw a person standing at the door, and her heart skipped a beat in fright. Just as she was about to glare at the culprit, a strange fragrance penetrated her nose, and then she saw a bowl of noodles in Gu Huizi's hand. Suwon looked at the porcelain white bowl filled with thin noodles, soaked in golden chicken soup, a handful of tender green vegetables, and a poached egg lying next to it, sprinkled with finely chopped green onions. It just looked good. It makes people move their index fingers. She sniffed gently, the fragrance of oil and spring onions permeating her lungs, and pursed her lips. Greedy. Gu Huizi said in a clear voice, "Don't want to eat?" You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruan Meng Baobao. Chapter 56. Suwon stared at the chicken noodle soup handed to her, unable to recover. She never thought that he would cook noodles for her. No matter how much Gu Huizi doesn't like her, she is nominally his wife and there will always be a man's possessiveness. She had a great conversation with Zhao Wei. Did she challenge his dignity as a man? Deliberately showing affection in front of Zhao Wei. Who knew he actually cooked it? And it looks delicious. Suwon was not a hypocritical person, so she quickly held the bowl in both hands. I want it, I want it. She put the noodles on the table and couldn't wait to stir the slender noodles in the bowl with her chopsticks, and the rich and delicious aroma came out. Suwon took a bite. The delicious taste made Suwon, who was always picky about food, make her eyes light up. She finished the bowl of noodles and the soup with a slurp. She placed the bowl on the table with satisfaction and handed over a glass of warm water. Suwon raised her eyes and looked at Gu Huizi. The man had a clear face. The sunlight slanted into his eyes from the window, coating him with a warm halo, and his cold expression seemed slightly softer. She suddenly felt uneasy. Gu Huizi bought her clothes as a return gift. Today we are cooking noodles and serving tea and water. Is it possible that my brain has been poisoned? Suwon placed the water glass on the table and held his wrist to take his pulse. Gu Huizi froze and lowered his eyes, staring firmly at the two tender onion-like fingers on his wrist, pressing softly on his pulse. Hey, why is your pulse beating faster than before? Suwon felt that his pulse was normal and his body was improving. It shouldn't be like this. She looked at Gu Huizi suspiciously, and suddenly stretched out her hand to press his chest. Gu Huizi was on guard, turned sideways, and pulled down his sleeves to cover his wrists. He said calmly, I'm tired. Gu Huizi's eyes were very calm, and nothing strange. Suwon raised her eyebrows but didn't say anything. She praised him, the noodles you cooked are delicious. After a pause, she added, it's more delicious than the rice you cook. Gu Huizi was silent, pursed his lips and said, Zhao Wei is a master of barbecue. If he does well, what does it have to do with me? Suwon glanced at him with a strange expression. How do you know he is good at barbecue? Gu Huizi felt inexplicably relieved after hearing the first half of Suwon's words. He said with a rare pleasant expression, today I went to Ziwixiang Tower and met Zhao Die. That's what he said. So you cooked noodles for me to show off your cooking skills? Childish. Suwon stepped out of the house. She didn't hear the footsteps and turned to look over. The man, who was dressed in a moon-white gown and had a bone-shaped complexion, was clearing the dishes on the table. He seemed to be aware of her gaze and tilted his head slightly. A pair of dark eyes looked at her quietly, with a questioning look in his eyes. A strange feeling flashed in Suwon's heart, and she said in a strange way, Zhao Wei's deputy general is in critical condition. He asked me to treat him. Gu Huizi was stunned for a moment, and smiles gradually overflowed from his eyes. It is your duty to practice medicine and treat diseases. There is no need to explain it to me. Suwon snorted lightly, duplicity. The corners of his mouth raised unconsciously. Suwon was going to Ziwixiang Tower. After walking a few miles and walking through a narrow alley, she could reach Ziwixiang Tower. Just as he went around, he was stopped by shopkeeper Fang, who was squatting in the alley. Ms. Shopkeeper Fang had already found out Suwan's identity. With a flattering smile on his face, "I am the shopkeeper of Feng Xianglu. You are a busy person, so I have no choice but to waste some of your time here. We, Feng Lu, are willing to give up 50% of the bonus to you and invite you to come to Feng Lu to be the chef." The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruan Meng Baobao. Chapter 57. Suwan was not surprised at all. Feng Xiang House started by poaching the chef from Ziwixiang House. Now that she has taken away the business of Feng Lu, shopkeeper Fang will definitely poach her. Suwan curled her lips. The 50% bonus from Fragrance House is not as good as the 10% bonus from Ziwixiang House. Anyone with a discerning eye will know who to choose. This sentence was like a slap on shopkeeper Fang's face. Shopkeeper Fang blushed. But he had something to ask for, so he had no choice but to endure the humiliation. Shopkeeper Fang squeezed out a flattering smile on his face and said dryly, "If your craftsmanship comes to Feng Xianglu, the business of Feng Xianglu will be better than that of Ziwixianglu, and there will be an extra 10% bonus. Do you think this is true?" He gritted his teeth and put down all his money, and said even more enthusiastically, "Mrsku, if you feel that the 50% bonus is less, I will add another 10% and give you a 60% bonus. Our flavor building shows the greatest sincerity, what do you think?" Suwan's eyebrows moved. She didn't believe shopkeeper Fang's words at all. He promised a huge profit in order to pry the corner. After shopkeeper Fang gets everything she wants, the 60% bonus in her hand will not be her wealth, but a life-saving talisman. There was sarcasm in her eyes, and she said playfully, "Lu Cheng? Am I the boss of Feng Xianglu? All decisions are made by me? You won't interfere?" Shopkeeper Fang was stunned. He had never thought about this problem. Naturally, the biggest owner couldn't be Suwan. He just said this first, coaxed people to the flavor building, grabbed the business again, and then tried to find a way to get back the bonus given to Suwan. Thinking of this, shopkeeper Fang said with a smile, "Whatever you do in Ziwixiang building, it will be the same in flavor building." Not interested, Suwan walked past shopkeeper Fang and left. Shopkeeper Fang stared at Suwan's back with evil eyes. If he didn't drink the toast but had to drink as a penalty, don't blame him for being rude. Wrapped in anger, shopkeeper Fang returned to the flavor building. There were only a few customers in Feng Xiang restaurant. Shopkeeper Fang hated Suwan in his heart. If she hadn't intervened, the restaurant's business would not have plummeted. Destroying someone's wealth is like killing one's parents. Fang Weivue came in from the door and asked him, "Second uncle, is Suwan willing to come to Feng Xiang building? This bitch has eyes on the top of her head, so she doesn't like our flavor restaurant." Shopkeeper Fang gritted his teeth and spat, "Isn't it just that she knows how to cook? Without her hands, I don't see how she can be proud of her." Fang Weivue turned his head and looked at Ziwixianglu opposite, with fierceness flashing in his eyes. He lowered his eyes, making it difficult to see the emotions in his eyes. "Second uncle, we have to see if she can catch her when she robs our things." Shopkeeper Fang looked at Fang Weivue's leaving figure, his eyes flashed slightly, but he did not stop him. After Suwan finished her work, she was so tired that she sat on the threshold of the back door of the kitchen. Gu's mother brought a bowl of warm water and handed it to her. Huizi hired a carriage and waited at the door. "You have been tired for a long day. Let's go home and rest early." Suwan drank a glass of water and stood up. Her face was stained with fatigue, but her eyes were bright. "It's okay. Are you comfortable in a restaurant? I like cooking. It's easier than what I did before. The people in the restaurant are very nice to me." A smile appeared on Gu's mother's face. She took the bowl from Suwan's hand and placed it on the table. The two of them left the restaurant together and got on the carriage at the door. Suwan looked at Gu Huizi's side face. The cold moonlight shone on his face, and his brow bones were soft, giving him the illusion of being approachable. She sat opposite and leaned against the wall of the car. Gu's mother put a piece of pastry into Suwan's hand and said, "You didn't eat much tonight. Eat a snack to cushion your stomach." Suwan gave Gu's mother a toothy smile and took a bite of the yam cake. Suddenly, the carriage shook violently and stopped suddenly. Unprepared, Suwan was about to be thrown away when a strong arm wrapped around her waist and she fell into an embrace full of light medicinal fragrance. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruan Meng Baobao. Chapter 58. Gu Huizi frowned and his eyes were sharp. "What's going on?" There are people blocking the road and robbing us." The driver was so frightened that he lost his mind and said with a pale face, two people." Suwan's face suddenly darkened, and she stood up from Gu Huizi's arms. She slapped half of the cake in his hand, opened the curtain and went out, looking coldly at the two people holding sticks in their hands. When Hulauer and Linda saw Suwan, their eyes flashed fiercely and they approached the carriage. Suwan took the riding whip from the coachman's hand and swung it towards Hulauer, wrapping it around his neck like a snake. She pulled hard, Hulauer turned over in pain, and snatched the stick from Hulauer's hand. Hit the back of his neck. Hulauer fell to the ground with a bang, unconscious. Suwan didn't wait for Linda to react, jumped off the carriage, and swung the stick in her hand. Linda quickly dodged and Suwan kicked him in the crotch. Linda's face turned red, his veins popped out, and he bent down to cover his crotch in pain. Suwan hit him on the back of the neck with her elbow, and Linda fell to the ground. He tried to resist, but his arm was painfully pinched by slender fingers. He let out a painful groan from his throat. Linda shuddered when he met Suwan's cold eyes. "Who asked you to come?" Suwan's fingers seemed to be tearing off his entire arm. Linda looked at the fierceness in Suwan's eyes, and his heart was beating violently. Fear was like a pair of hands stretching out from hell, as if it was going to drag him down in the next moment, and there would be no recovery. "He doesn't want to die." Linda broke out in a cold sweat and did not dare to hide it. He gritted his teeth and said in a trembling voice, Fang Weavua, he asked us brothers to cripple your hand. They were the bullies in the town. There was a sick man in the carriage, an old woman who was incapable of taking responsibility, and Suwan, a weak woman, so they were not afraid at all and wanted to fight quickly. But I didn't expect that this weak girl was not weak at all. Crack, the sound of broken hand bones sounded, and Linda's screams went straight into the sky. "Keep your eyes open, who can be provoked and who cannot be provoked." Suwan threw the person to the ground violently, showing his white teeth, and said solemnly, "Next time it will be your life." Linda's hair stood on end and he huddled on the ground, not even daring to look at Suwan. Gu Huizi lifted the curtains and stared at Suwan with his bright black eyes. Her eyebrows were sharp, not as lazy and gentle as usual. The night wind blew her sarong flying, and she was wearing a murderous look. If Suwan felt something, she turned her head and looked over. Gu Huizi's dark and deep eyes stared at her, and there seemed to be something intriguing in his gaze. Suwan raised her eyebrows, clapped her hands nonchalantly, picked up the riding whip and threw it to the coachman, got into the carriage, and straightened her dress and long hair that had been blown away by the wind. "They are two noobs. I managed to get rid of them just by showing off my skills." Suwan leaned against the wall of the car, her eyes as bright as stars and her expression cold and arrogant. "How dare you come out to block the road and rob them?" Mother Gu's concerned words were suppressed by Suwan's words. Thinking of the screams of the two men, she pursed her lips and looked at Suwan's calm appearance. She should be unhurt. Gu Huizi closed his eyes, put the yam cake back in Suwan's hand, and calmly glanced at the two people lying on the ground outside the car window. Suwan glanced at the yam cake in the palm of her hand, and suddenly thought of that pounce just now. It seemed that his body was not as thin as it looked. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruan Meng Baobao. Chapter 59. Suwon stared straight at Gu Huizi, as if trying to see through the material of his clothes to see his body. Gu Huizi looked at her frivolous eyes and closed his clothes with his fingers. Suwon was not weak at all, she stared at him calmly, and stuffed half of the yam cake into her mouth with a crooked look. She tasted a bit of the bitter medicinal fragrance, just like the breath that poured into her nose when he held her in his arms. Gu Huizi pursed his thin lips, covered his mouth and coughed a few times, closed his eyes and leaned against the car wall. Suwon looked away, thinking about how to teach Fang Weivue a lesson tomorrow. Those who bully her can't escape unscathed. The carriage stopped at the door of Gu's house, and several people got out of the carriage. Gu's mother and Gu Huizi entered the yard first, and Suwon lazily followed behind. Suddenly someone grabbed her sleeve. She turned around and recognized the timid woman in front of her as Mrs. Hu, the eldest daughter-in-law of the village chief's family. Is something wrong? Suwon broke away from Hu's hand and kept distance from her. Hu's cheekbones were bruised. He looked at Suwon timidly and said timidly, Mrs. Gu, can you not go to town tomorrow? Facing Suwon's bright eyes, Hu twisted his joints. With his thick fingers, he murmured uneasily, land is for sale in the village. See if there is any land you want to buy. Suwon looked at Mrs. Hu inquiringly, guessing the meaning of her words. Don't let her go to town and stay in the village to buy land. No matter how you look at it, it's quite weird. If you must go to town, can you come back early in the afternoon? Mrs. Hu felt very uncomfortable, as if Suwon had seen through it. She wanted to say something else, but when she heard the footsteps, she said eagerly, you must come back early, remember, come back early. After saying that, without waiting for Suwon's reaction, she left in a hurry. Gu's mother walked out of the yard and saw a thin figure blending into the night. She frowned and said, why does Madame Hu want you? Madame Zhang is not a good person. Don't get close to her daughter-in-law. Suwon said thoughtfully, Ms. Hu looks very pitiful. She is often bruised and bruised. Did Zhang give her a beating? Who else could be there besides Zhang? Hu is a coward and has a good heart, but she doesn't dare to disobey Zhang. If you are more careful, nothing will happen to you. Mother Gu was afraid that Suwon and Hu would get along, and Zhang the family threatened the Hu family to do harm to Suwon. We should stay away from the Song family. Okay, Suwon responded, holding Gu's mother's hand and entering the room, get some rest, we have to get up early tomorrow. Gu's mother went back to the house and made clothes for Suwon. Suwon felt sleepy and didn't want to sleep much. She thought that Gu Jingyun had to go to school and Gu Beizu had to go to school when he was only 8 years old. He took out a piece of plain cloth and found needle and thread to sew a small school bag for Gu Beizu. At dawn the next day, Suwonkyang cheered up and got up, preparing to go to town early to stop Fang Wuxian. When he opened the door and came out, he saw Gu Huizi coming back from outside. His green gown was wet with mist. Suwon was stunned, glanced at the gray sky, and looked at Gu Huizi again. Where have you been? Gu Huizi looked upright and looked at me calmly. With a faint smile on his lips, he said gently and calmly, you said that I am weak and walking in the morning will help to keep fit. Suwon said and her eyes moved around his clear and beautiful face. She always felt that this man was in a happy mood. She didn't think much about it. After washing, she told Gu Huizi and went to Ziwixiang Tower in the town. At a glance, I saw that the Fengxiang building was usually open at this hour, but today the door was closed, and the doorway was wet as if it had been washed by water. Shopkeeper Su came out of the restaurant and stood next to Suwon, saying sadly, Ms. Gu, Fang Liu's hands were cut off and he was thrown at the door of the restaurant. The favorite of the Nongmen group, the female supporting role is a full-level boss. Author, Ruan Meng Baobao. Chapter 60. Suwan was shocked. Her first reaction was that the person who blocked the road last night had suffered a heavy loss at her hands, so she wanted to make amends with Fang Liu. The next moment, she put this thought away. Those two people were so ruthless that they would not fall into her hands easily. A man named Qingfeng Jiyu suddenly appeared in Suwan's mind. Gu Huizi had been out this morning, and only he and Gu's mother knew that Fang Liu had hired someone to deal with her. She couldn't help but laugh when she thought of Gu Huizi's sick appearance. This idea was too absurd. Gu Huizi hasn't turned black yet, how could he be so vicious? Besides, he doesn't have the manpower. This man's methods are too cruel. Fang Liu has offended a powerful person. Shopkeeper Su couldn't help but sigh when he thought of Fang Liu coming to Ziwixianglu to cause trouble, and said with emotion, "You still can't be too arrogant." Suwan said in her heart, "He deserves what he deserves." She guessed that it might have been Qi Guang's hand. Qi Guang was favored by her and wanted to stay and protect her to repay his kindness. Since he was from his grandfather, he might have helped her eliminate the trouble secretly. Suwan thought that she would have to express her gratitude the next time she saw him. Sister Su, Zhang Beiwei held a spatula in his hand and shouted excitedly to Suwan with bright eyes, "My cooking skills have improved. Come and have a try and teach me a few more dishes." Suwan's head was covered with black lines. Her body was 16 years old and Zhang Beiwei was 19 years old, giving him an advantage. "I'll go take a look." Suwan followed Zhang Beiwei into the kitchen. A strong smell of burnt meat hit her nostrils. She saw a plate of sliced crispy duck placed on the long table. It was golden in color and looked very delicious. "Tasty." Zhang Beiwei handed over a pair of chopsticks in an awkward manner. "You don't like sweet noodle sauce, I paired it with spicy sauce." Suwan smiled, picked up a piece of duck meat, put it in his mouth and took a bite. The skin is crispy and caramelized, and the meat is tender and soft. With a little red and spicy sauce, the spiciness stimulates the taste buds, and Suwan can't help but eat a few more pieces. "I'm making rapid progress." Suwanla's nose was sweating and her lips were bright red. She took a glass of water and took a sip, glowing with a layer of moist water. She said with a smile, "I'll teach you braised pork and tehu whitebait later." Zhang Beiwei's eyes were fixed on Suwan's lips, and he came to his senses in a daze. His ears were burning red, and his eyes were darting back and forth, not daring to look at her. He stuttered and said, "Then, I'll prepare the ingredients." Suwan felt baffled when she saw him jumping faster than a rabbit. Zhang Beiwei asked someone to get the whitebait and invited Suwan over eagerly. Suwan saw a dozen whitebaits in the basin, which were shaped like hostas, colored like ivory, tender and transparent. This whitebait can be stir-fried, deep-fried, steamed, or made into soup. Suwan prepared the ingredients, including an egg, fresh mushrooms, fresh whitebait, coriander and ginger. She smiled at Zhang Beiwei and said, "I'll teach you how to make whitebait today fish soup." Zhang Beiwei nodded like a fool, "I'll help you." Suwan asked him to watch on the side as she removed the stems of the mushrooms and shredded them, shredded the ginger, minced the coriander, and removed the yolks from the eggs, leaving only the whites. Pour water into the pot, add a small spoonful of salt and a few drops of lard, blanch the mushrooms and take them out for later use. Rinse the pot clean, heat the pot with cold oil, add shredded ginger and stir-fry until fragrant, then add the washed whitebait, add a little rice wine and stir-fry evenly. Let's put a little water and add pork bone soup to increase the freshness. Suwan poured in the mushrooms, quickly added the seasonings, stirred and brought to a boil. Add a little starch to thicken the gravy. Finally, pour in the egg white and use a spoon. Stir well and cook, drizzle with a few drops of sesame oil and sprinkle with chopped coriander. Suwon served the whitebait soup in a porcelain white bowl. It was as white as snow and garnished with green coriander. It looked fresh and delicious. Zhang Wei took a spoon and scooped up a spoonful. It was fragrant before entering the mouth. When it entered the mouth, it was soft and delicate, not fishy at all, and especially fragrant and tender. Before he could say anything, shopkeeper Su came in with a money bag in his hand. Zhang Wei didn't care about the hot hands, and ran away into the backyard to eat alone with a bowl of whitebait soup. Shopkeeper Su glared, and his beard stood up in anger, but thinking about the matter at hand, he didn't pick up the feather duster and chase after him. Ms. Gu, a tall man with an injured right leg, gave it to you. Shopkeeper Su put the money bag into Suwon's hand. Suwon was startled and asked, "Where are the others?" "Shopkeeper Su, let's go." Suwon told him, "Let Zhang Wei master this dish, and I'll inspect it when I get back." After that, she hurriedly chased Qi Guang. I asked people along the way and found the town dock. Suwon watched a group of people carry 2 sacks on their shoulders at a time and move them onto the boat with great force. Qi Guang was at the back, carrying 2 sacks on his shoulders and walking very slowly. The people who had carried it out wanted to help, but Qi Guang stopped them all. Suwon squeezed the money bag in her hand tightly and looked at them all dripping with sweat, their dark skin reddened by the sun. When she saw a seller selling sour plum soup next to her, she smashed her mouth and picked up a piece of clothes to wipe the sweat from her forehead. Squatting down by the river and drinking water, she felt very uncomfortable. Qi Guang noticed something and turned his head to look over. He saw Suwon in the distance. Such a rough man was so frightened that he trembled. He dropped the sack from his shoulders and seemed about to dive into the river the next moment. When the others saw it, their pupils tightened, and they lined up in a very orderly manner and stood in a military posture. Suwon. After Qi Guang panicked, he calmed down and shouted at the top of his voice, "We are practicing." The boss shouted angrily, "What are you doing? Why don't you go and move the sacks? If you delay the shipment, your wages will be deducted." Qi Guang's face turned red from suppressing it, and he really wanted to have the guts to throw down the sack and say, "I quit." Seeing Suwon's frail body, fluttering sarong, and not even a decent hairpin on her head, she scraped her teeth hard and turned around to continue carrying the sacks. A group of tough men broke their waists and crushed their self-esteem under their feet. He was reluctant to even drink a bowl of sour plum soup, so he saved up money to give it to her. Suwon felt sour in her heart that she bought 2 large barrels of sour plum soup and waited for them to get out of the boat.